The House at the Edge of the Woods, full story and joy. They called it the House at the Edge of the Woods. No one in town remembered when it had been built, or who had first lived there. Most people avoided it, passing by on the other side of the road, but some who were curious, or foolish, dared to venture inside. Those who returned never spoke of what they'd seen, and some never returned at all. Lena had heard the stories growing up, the whispered warnings passed between kids at school, always shushed by the teachers or elders. Her grandmother, the most superstitious of them all, once told her, the house calls to people. Don't ever listen if you hear it. But Lena never believed in those things. Ghosts, curses, haunted houses. They were just stories. She was a firm believer in what could be seen, touched, and explained. That was why, when her friends dared her to go inside the house one October evening, she agreed without hesitation. It was Halloween night, and a cold wind carried the first hints of winter through the small town. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on porches, casting jagged shadows, and children in costumes darted between houses, filling the air with laughter. But as Lena and her friends approached the edge of town, the lively sounds faded into an eerie quiet. The house loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the sky. It was tall and narrow, with blackened windows and a roof that sloped in awkward angles, as if it had sagged over time. The trees around it seemed to bend toward the house, their bare branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. "We'll just go to the front door and knock," said Jake, the ringleader of their group. He was grinning, trying to hide the fact that he was just as nervous as the rest of them. "That's it. Then we can say we did it." Lena nodded. "Fine. Let's get it over with." As they approached the front yard, the air felt different, heavier. The gate creaked as they pushed it open, the hinges groaning as though they hadn't moved in years. The front steps were cracked, and weeds grew between the stones. Despite the chill, Lena felt sweat gather at the back of her neck. It was just a house, she told herself. Old, abandoned, but just a house. They stood in front of the door, its wood warped and peeling. Jake raised a fist to knock, but paused. He looked at Lena. "You do it," he said. "Fine," she said, annoyed, and raised her hand. Before her knuckles could make contact, the door swung inward with a loud groan. No one had touched it. The four of them stared into the darkness beyond the threshold. For a long moment, no one spoke. "Well," Lena said, stepping forward. "It's open. We should go in?" "No way," Sarah whispered, stepping back. "We knocked, that's enough. Let's just leave." Jake hesitated, but the mocking grin returned. "Come on. Are we really going to back out now?" Lena swallowed and took a step inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic, like rust. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering in from the street, and she saw that the house was bare, except for a large staircase leading to the second floor. Behind her, Jake and the others stepped in reluctantly, their footsteps soft on the warped floorboards. "I don't like this," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Relax," Jake said, though his voice trembled slightly. "It's just an old house." But as they ventured farther inside, the atmosphere seemed to change. The walls, once dull and peeling, appeared to close in on them, and the air grew colder with every step. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift and move, as though alive. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house, causing them all to jump. The front door had slammed shut. Jake cursed under his breath. "Who closed the door?" "Maybe the wind," Lena said, though she didn't believe it. There hadn't been any wind when they entered. "We should go," Sarah said, her voice shaky. She was backing toward the door, but when she grabbed the knob and twisted, it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," she said, panic rising in her voice. "It won't open." "Let me try," Jake said, pushing past her. He yanked on the door, but it remained firmly shut. The air around them seemed to thrum with an energy Lena couldn't explain. A low creak sounded from upstairs, like the groaning of ancient wood under a heavy weight. "We're not alone," Ethan whispered, his eyes wide. Jake laughed nervously. "Stop it. You're freaking everyone out." "I'm serious," Ethan said, his voice low and insistent. "Someone's upstairs." They all froze, listening. At first, there was nothing but the creaking of the house as it settled. Then a soft, rhythmic sound, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the second floor. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. There was no one else in the house. There couldn't be. Without thinking, she grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to get out of here. Now!" But Jake shook her off. "It's just an animal or something. I'm going to check it out." Before anyone could stop him, he was already halfway up the stairs. The others stayed frozen at the base, watching as his figure disappeared into the shadows at the top. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a scream, Jake's scream, shattered the stillness. Lena's blood turned to ice. Without thinking, she ran up the stairs, her heart pounding in her ears. When she reached the top, she saw him standing in the middle of the hallway, staring at something she couldn't see. "Jake," she called, but he didn't respond. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. Lena stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat as she saw what he was staring at. It was a figure, tall and thin, its face hidden beneath a tattered hood. Its arms were unnaturally long, and its fingers were tipped with sharp, black claws. But what froze Lena in place was its eyes, glowing red, burning with a malevolent hunger. The figure took a step toward Jake, its movements slow and deliberate. Jake backed away, but it was too late. In a single, swift motion, the creature reached out and wrapped its clawed fingers around Jake's throat. He gasped, his eyes bulging as the creature lifted him off the ground. Lena screamed, her legs finally responding as she turned and ran back down the stairs. "We have to go," she shouted to Sarah and Ethan, who were still standing at the base of the stairs, their faces white with fear. Without waiting for a response, Lena grabbed the front door and yanked with all her strength. This time, it flew open, and cold air rushed in from outside. She didn't stop to look back, didn't stop to see if Jake was following. She just ran. The others followed, their footsteps pounding behind her as they fled down the road, leaving the house behind. It wasn't until they reached the safety of the town that Lena finally stopped, gasping for breath. She turned to look at the others. But Jake wasn't there. He never made it out.